Hi, welcome everyone. This is Ankur Vora, the head of outreach and international admissions at OP Jindal Global University, Delhi NCR, a leading social science and research-based liberal arts institution. I am very happy to be here today. Although we were planning to, all of me and my colleagues were planning to be in New Mexico next month to present in person, but unfortunately, due to this pandemic that has stuck us and has changed the way we interact and present. We are here for you recording this session. I hope all of you who get to watch this session enjoy this session and appreciate the work that all of us have taken to put this together. We having coming from a continent, most of us, apart from Raghavendra, who is based in US, we are based coming on from India and Bangladesh. So we will be talking about the places that we come from. The topic of the session is South Asia and its people. The idea of this session is to talk about, give a regional update on South Asia. We were also planning to talk about the culture and the people in detail about each country, but then God had other plans and we had to reimagine this session with more emphasis on COVID and what is the impact that it is having on recruitment trends from this part of the world. I'm very happy to introduce my panel. I have with me Shilpa. Shilpa Gupta is a well-known contributor to International ACAC. She has been attending annual conferences on more than multiple occasions. She is currently working with Nirja Modi School, Jaipur, as the career counselor. She is also executive member of the executive board of International ACAC. She has done fantastic job for our community. The next person on my panel is Raghavendra Singh. Rag again has been an integral part of International ACAC for last many years, having attended and presented at multiple conferences. Rag works in Northern Arizona University as the student recruitment officer for that university. Next is Iqbal Sohail. He is the Education USA representative in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Iqbal works with a lot of US universities and students and parents in Bangladesh to recruit students and also guide and counsel them on to the best fit universities. My last but not the least representative is Professor Arjo Majumdar. He is the Dean for Admissions and Outreach at OP Jindal Global University, which is my university in Delhi NCR. He is also a faculty and teaches the subjects related to law in our university. So moving on now, just to give you a background for those of you who may not be aware of the region, South Asia, as we call today, is a successor to the British Indian Empire. Before 1947, most of the countries that you see here in South Asia today were not sovereign nations, but were ruled by the colonial power in United Kingdom. Post 1947, we had 8 sovereign nations coming up in the region, with definitely India being the behemoth and the largest country, but then you have substantial other countries in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bhutan. So these are the 8 countries that represent South Asia. A key part about South Asia is that although we cover only 3.5% of the world landmass, we have almost 25% of the world population. So it's a very diverse, very densely populated part of the world. The population of India alone is 1.3 billion, which is next to China with 1.4 billion. So definitely South Asia is a highly populated region with a lot of, I'll say, a very diverse economy, a very diverse demographics, but also one of the fastest growing economies in the world are in South Asia. And this is again before the COVID pandemic hit us. Almost most of the economies in this part of the world were growing at 6 to 7%. Some of them were even growing at, like Bangladesh was growing at 8.5%. So very big economies, and those of you who follow international economy know that India is known as the last many years has been touted as the next global economy. It will overtake many developed nation economies in coming years. We don't know what will happen now due to the COVID crisis, but definitely the momentum is here in the country and in the region. Uh, just to give you an idea on the number of students that go abroad from this part of the world, and this number has been steadily rising over the last many years. My colleagues will be talking in detail about the recruitment trends for US universities, and you'll show a definite uptick in the students going to US and Canada. But just to give you an overall picture, there are about India sent abroad 750,000 students in the year 2019, out of which 200,000 plus students were going to US universities. Again, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, all these countries send about 50,000 plus students abroad in last couple of years. And there are a substantial number of students who go to US also from these countries. The smaller countries like Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and Bhutan do send some students, but I'll not say there are huge numbers. But in South Asia, if there is a country, I think these are the 3-4 countries, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, which send substantial number of students for international education. And that number was on the rise every year on year for last many years. And we were expecting a good year this too, but until COVID struck us. Some of the key observations across South Asia, just to generalize this, since this part of the world is very interconnected. There are close-knit families, so students prefer going for masters abroad. That is generally the trend that is also reflected in the numbers that most of the students from this part of the world go for masters program. Word of mouth and socio-political environment definitely plays a key role in deciding education destination, because the students in this part of the world are looking at not only a university but a country, how welcoming that the country's environment is for, and what are the long-term prospects of job, permanent residency. So those are the kind of factors that also play into mind while students looking for international education. So as I mentioned in my last point, it's not only about the university, it's also about the country when deciding to go abroad for higher education. So these are some of the factors that I wanted to set the context of this session in by. And these are some of the snippets from the media outlets. You know, the COVID-19 has affected us very badly. All the nations in South Asia are rethinking of how they will pursue now international education. How will the students go abroad? Where will the finances come from? And there is definitely a turmoil there happening with regards to that. To answer some of these questions, I have starting with Ms. Shilpa. Shilpa, as I mentioned, is the career counselor at Nirja Modi School, and she has been a phenomenal colleague to me. I'll request Shilpa to please go ahead and talk about India and what does she see the trends from this country like.
Thank you so much, Ankur, and hello to everybody. Hello to everybody in this virtual conference. We just got to know this morning that we are the first one to record our sessions. Obviously feels privileged, but yeah, welcome everybody to be a part of our panel and to be a part of our webinar. As Ankur mentioned, a lot of Indian students do tend to go overseas. And based on the raw data that we have, US seems to attract over 30% of students aspiring to do higher education overseas. Having said that, we also have a few upcoming countries like the UK, Australia, Canada, which is showing some great phenomenal numbers in students wanting to go overseas. I also have a pie chart which says the QS, which is a QS survey, wherein the children are now thinking about what are the next steps because the pandemic has hit us. And if you see, a lot of them now want to defer their entry until next year. Obviously, because a lot of parents do not want too much of online education and they don't want to pay that kind of money for an online education. The other set of parents are really thinking about making the students study in their home country in a university close by, so that at least they are able to get some in-person classes. So those are the kind of conversations, difficult conversations that we all are getting. I'm assuming the university folks also are getting a lot of these kind of conversations. And I'm sure we are all prepared to answer these in the times to come. Ankur, next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk about why Indian students choose to study abroad. Uh, as Ankur mentioned, India has a huge population, and in terms of having a high population, our higher education institutions are far too little. Uh, Hence, the admission process to get into one of the Indian universities is extremely challenging. So, to just give you a rough statistics, the engineering institution in India, which is the IIT, uh, has an acceptance rate of about 0.1% to 0.2%, which is ridiculously low. It doesn't mean that students are appearing for entrance exams at these institutions are not good. It's just that the numbers are too huge. Also, most of the universities in India are looking at entrance examinations and do not weigh that kind of importance to the high school credentials. So the students, along with attending high school, also have to prepare for these entrance examinations. So it becomes extremely challenging for the students to do everything. Students who are not great test takers then choose to study abroad vis-a-vis taking these entrance examinations to get into Indian universities. Then they obviously have more study option outside India. Flexibility and choice are key factors. Students having dual interests, students who are undecided, it is worthwhile for them, as Indian higher education tends to get a little rigid in terms of subject combination. Having said that, we do have some new liberal arts universities like the Jindal Ashoka Flame, which are now coming up with very viable liberal arts options for Indian students. Quality of education. Even though the standard of courses available across colleges in India is developing, there still seems to be lack of opportunities for practical applications. Then research. Students pursuing subjects, particularly in research-centric areas, do not receive enough support from Indian colleges in terms of infrastructure and resources. And last but not the least, better immigration policies in countries like Canada and Australia. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about US a little bit, and then I will go to the other countries. This is a survey collectively done by ACRO, IIE, NAFSA, AIE, NACAC, and we see that 40% of US colleges are seeing decline in international student population and student applications. The main reason is the cost. And then obviously there is a concern of feeling unwelcome, safety, visa denials, visa delays, and civil unrest. 26% reported declines in undergraduate international student numbers and 15% in graduate. Now, what can university do to make this a smoother transition, make it more welcoming? Obviously, increase funding, scholarships, however they can, improve support for international students, increase engagement with alumni, increase partnerships with local institutions so that the students can do 2 years here and 2 years overseas, or 2+1, however it works out in your country, and basically do an active outreach and recruitment. Obviously, the main challenges that we saw with US is also arising from the OPT extension, the H-1B visa getting denied this year. So those are some conversations I'm hoping and assuming that we will have in the next couple of days now. Next slide, Ankur. Coming back to the other countries, the other 5 very popular countries are Canada, Australia, UK, New Zealand, and Germany. Canada has shown a growth of 6.5 times in the last decade. And the basic reason is cost, safety, and their immigration policies. Australia's effort to overcome the perception amongst Indian students' families that it is unsafe is obviously going away. And we see a 1.5 times growth in the Indian students in a decade. The basic reasons being streamlined visa processing, reduced financial requirements, and access to 2-year post-study work visa. Despite the high cost and tightening visa controls, Indian enrollments in the UK are still plummeting. And after the work visa, 2-year work visa was announced, interestingly, this year I had more UK applicants than the US applicants. So we see a changing trend, and obviously it is because of the international recognition of the high quality of higher education in the UK. And given that Indian higher education system is primarily modeled on the British system, Indian students feel comfortable in British universities. New Zealand is also driving a lot of numbers because of the ease of obtaining student visas and the post-study work opportunities. And obviously the attraction of getting a residency soon. Germany has also increased its growth 3.3 times in the last decade. Because of its reputation, the STEM fields are very popular amongst Indian students. Amongst almost 83% of students who apply to Germany are applying for STEM programs and highly reputed STEM programs. They do have a lot of courses that they offer in English, especially for masters, but they're also developing a lot for the undergraduate programs. Highly cost effective, a lot of universities provide free tuition for foreign students in Germany, and they also have an 18-month period after studies in order to find employment. So these are the key factors when Indian students consider higher education overseas. Thank you, Ankur, and I will now pass on to my colleague from Bangladesh, Iqbal.
Thank you, Shilpa. Thank you so much. Yeah, Iqbal, if you can talk about Bangladesh, the trends that you are seeing, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Shilpa, and thank you, Ankur. Hello, everyone. Let's move to Bangladesh. I'm an Education USA advisor, and I'll share my insights from Education USA Bangladesh perspective. Education USA is a US Department of State network of advising centers around the world in more than 178 countries and US territories. And we have more than 430 centers to provide students with accurate information, comprehensive and current information. So let's look at the whole education scenario in Bangladesh, what we find from our perspective. In Bangladesh, the country has developed a lot. It has made fantastic progress in the recent years, especially the net enrollment rate in the primary education has reached to 98% in 2018. The adult literacy rate increased from 46% in 2001 to 73% in 2018. So these are some very good numbers for Bangladesh education and shows that progress Bangladesh government has made in terms of education in general. In the higher education, however, there are some challenges. The number of enrollment rate is around 20%, which is doubled over the past decade, but still not up to the standard or the desired level. Next slide, please. So what does it mean? It means that a lot of students actually for quality education moving beyond Bangladesh. So outbound student flow has quadrupled in last 12 years. Between 2015 and 2017, it has reached from 15,000 to over 57,000. And these are primarily conceived that these are a result of growing colleges population together with emerging growing middle class who can afford a portion of their studies abroad, at least, if not the full of funding. And then the other or third reason is the insufficient high quality education opportunities. It doesn't, we do not mean to say that there are not enough universities or the seats available in universities, but students, many students pursue quality education. They want to make sure that their future or the future career prospects are ensured through educational investment. So next slide, please. So where do Bangladesh students go? What are the destination countries? US has always been the most popular destination, followed by UK. But countries like Malaysia, Australia, Germany, Canada, those are very rapidly coming up in the context, and a lot of students are going to these countries, especially in some cases, in some of these countries, in the undergraduate level. So moving forward, the next slide, we will see what are the student kind of their areas, different areas and different levels of education they pursue. Since I have the Open Doors number handy with me, and I can refer to that, let's look at the US numbers first. You'll see in the, in the middle part, the graph shows that the graduate population is 65% in the US. The students going from Bangladesh to the US, the number currently, according to the latest Open Door data, is near about 8,250 students, and 65% of them are pursuing graduate studies. That shows that there are opportunities in Bangladesh to pursue higher education, but at the graduate level, there are not enough research or further studies or facilities or high quality education that students can attain and then progress in their career. The third pie chart will tell you that 75% of Bangladeshi students who pursue higher education pursue STEM education. So it's a very, very good number of trend we are seeing from Bangladesh going to the US. In last 5 years, the numbers have grown from around 5,400 to 8,200, which is a very good steady increase. And also on the student side, like just to give you an example, that in a 4-hour fair in last fall, 24 US HEIs, they came to represent their institutions, and 2,000 students joined in a 4-hour fair. It was crowded, it was popular, it created a lot of interest. On the US HEI side as well, coming to this year, in the first 3 months, we have seen a lot of US universities coming in person, doing recruitment. And after the heat of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen an increased number of US HEIs doing webinar and targeted webinar for Bangladeshi students. So let's move to the next slide and let's talk about this whole COVID situation, how this is affecting Bangladesh higher education. And we will end. Next slide, please. Yes. So all the education institutions, including the universities, are closed in conjunction to the government's lockdown measures since March. And universities, local universities, have not been really able to move to online classes because due to financial constraints, lack of technical knowledge, and teaching techniques or teaching learning practices or digital tools, all this together, a survey was made locally, and due to all those different reasons, local higher education institutions have not been able to, as expected, switch to online education. So the result we are expecting that, like, qualified Bangladeshi students would continue to seek study abroad in the wake of COVID-19. So moving to my last slide, let's look at some of the deciding factors. By now we probably have made it, tried to make it clear that there are a lot of interests, but what are the deciding factors? Let's look at that. The question is, are there enough situation for the students, or what are the deciding factors? Let's look at it in a twofold way, because there are segments of population who are affluent and can go anywhere in the world to pursue their education, higher education. There are affluent families, there are international schools, English medium curriculums, where students go and pursue their education. And those are the kind of students, they can afford to go anywhere in the world, wherever they wish to go. But for a large number of Bangladeshi students, seeking financial aid is a factor. And financial aid is not always a dire need, or like it's not a requirement always for them as a necessity. But it can be a matter of prestige and pride as well when students will apply to different places, when they receive funding opportunities from one country than the other, they will probably choose the country where they get more funding, even though they can partially fund or provide funding from their personal sources. So, but there are many qualified students, motivated, highly motivated students, since they do not get any local government support for studying overseas. Only those students who have sufficient funding will attend studies in abroad. And institutions, if institutions provide more funding or financial aid packages and come up with lucrative offers, students will try to go to overseas countries and destinations to pursue their studies. Just to end up with COVID-19 survey results by one of the international development organizations in Bangladesh, it was found out among the household survey that 95% of respondents had suffered some sort of income losses, and 51% of respondents said their household income has been completely wiped out. So that are some of the factors to consider. Thank you very much for listening to us, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Iqbal, so much for providing us the context and perspectives from Bangladesh. May I now invite upon Rag to speak from a US university perspective. What are you seeing on the ground, and your thoughts on the current crisis?
Sure. Thank you so much again, Ankur, and certainly appreciate representing the U.S. university perspective here, but also as someone who went to the United States as an international student about 14 years back from India. It's always exciting to talk about the developments and changes that has happened, not just in India, but certainly overall in South Asia. The numbers certainly say a lot, and not just for India, but I think huge growth in terms of students studying abroad, certainly even the United States. And I think a big part of this goes back to the growing economy. When we think about India, many economic think tanks have highlighted the fact that the Indian economy is going to be among the 3 largest economies, and at some point of time among the 2 largest economies, perhaps by 2050. And as we see the growth of the middle class happen in all these countries, from Bangladesh at a 8.2% GDP growth, and Nepal, Sri Lanka, and India, we certainly see the parents also wanting to provide, quality education by sending abroad for the undergraduate or master's degree as well. We'll move to the next slide. Now, the other big factor on why students from India go abroad to study is certainly India has a huge population, and we'll focus for matters of this presentation on India as a case study. Now, with a 1.3 billion population, India has almost 50% of its population, which is below the age group of around 25. And a lot of these students are now considering to pursue either the undergraduate or graduate studies. And again, as Shilpa highlighted in her presentation, getting into the IITs, the IIMs, which are certainly quality institutions in India, and certainly many others, including the OP Jindal, sometimes can be quite a challenge. They're limited seats, but there's certainly a lot of aspirants who would love to be, part of those institutions. And that's where certainly many of these students look at studying abroad, from the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, to many other parts of the world. Certainly looking at quality of institutions, but also looking at experiential learning opportunities, which due to the large scale numbers, limited budgets, certainly can be a challenge to provide to these students in many of the Indian institutions also. We'll move to the next slide. Now, economy certainly plays a big factor. The Indian economy is growing, it's booming, and certainly you have a lot of multinational companies that have their headquarters as well as regional headquarters in South Asia as well as in India. But at the same time, with this huge population, there's a huge burden on the Indian government to create on a regular basis a number of jobs, almost 8 million jobs on a regular basis. Now, the challenge with that, of course, tends to be that as the population grows, the economy has grown almost till very recently at a healthy 7% GDP growth, it hasn't been able to create the same number of jobs. In fact, last year we saw a huge unemployment rate spike in India, and this was before the COVID situation. And certainly, I think with the current situation, things might get more challenging. So a lot of these students, certainly aspire to go abroad. The United States, of course, has a huge Indian American diaspora with a number of CEOs who came as an international students. And certainly, I think looking at those opportunities is definitely a big reason for students from India and South Asia to study abroad. We'll go to the next slide. So we talked about the aspirations, and then we talk about the reality. Certainly, the United States is the land of opportunities, but at the same time, there are certainly some challenges in terms of visa, or perhaps in more recent days with the pause on H-1B approvals. But at the same time, it also remains a country where, when students think about some of the biggest multinational companies of the world, from Google to Microsoft to Adobe, just a few of those. The CEO of these companies, of course, themselves came to the United States as international students from India, and that certainly inspires many more international students who consider the United States as sort of their destination for higher education. Now, that's, of course, the side of aspirations. In reality, yes, we have seen a decline in visas, particularly the F1 visas, when it comes to a number of South Asian countries. And again, sometimes people speculate with the administration and so on. But at the same time, if you look at those numbers closely, the first major decline, particularly in terms of India, that started was in the year 2016. So again, numbers certainly give us some perspective. And there are certainly challenges that many of these students face. But I think the US still remains as a major destination. And universities, of course, have worked very hard by communicating with students, parents, and certainly any recruitment opportunity that we get to visit those countries as well. We'll move to the next one. So what's basically the next major step? And I know we'll talk a little bit more about this in our discussion today, but clearly with the COVID, what we're seeing is not a stop in international education, but what I call the great pause. Now, with this great pause, there will be some major changes coming in international higher education. And a big part of that is going to be the collaboration and adaptation. Now, this is not just limited to the COVID situation. Again, there's a lot more students in these countries who certainly would like to be a part of the US higher education system, or perhaps of the other system, but certainly there are limitations in terms of what they can afford. And I think looking at perhaps from a page of the private sector in the United States certainly gives us hope to those in the higher education sector of what can be done in terms of collaboration and adaptation. I talk about the great example of the Maharaja Mac. When McDonald's went to India, it just did not end up selling the same Big Mac at the same cost, with the same contents in India. It adapted to the Indian taste. It adapted in terms of the overall cost also to what an Indian consumer could afford. I think higher education here also has to keep in mind that with our current pricing, not everyone in South Asia may be able to afford this kind of education. And that's where perhaps collaborating with many of Indian institutions perhaps may be the way to go. Certainly, there are limitations in terms of government restrictions, but I think the government in India has also certainly made many changes and has eased down those restrictions, where we now see from Facebook to Walmart to Amazon now collaborating with Indian companies and looking at the opportunity that they have in the Indian market. And certainly, I think taking that page from the private higher education, certainly is the way for the higher education in the United States also to adapt to the changes that we will see with COVID-19. We'll move ahead. And I'm going to go ahead and let Dr. Majumdar talk a little bit more on this slide.
Ankur, I think you're on mute. but
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
happy
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Ankur.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Rag for sharing his thoughts from the US University perspective. Now, quickly moving on to Professor Arju Majumdar, who is the Dean for Admissions and Outreach at OP Jindal Global University. Professor, if you can talk about what are your recommendations for universities from outside India who are looking to recruit students and now in a situation where they are not able to travel to India and they have a lot of travel and visa restrictions. What will be your advice to those universities? How can they come out of this situation?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Ankur, and thank you so much to IASAC for setting this up. I'm going to draw upon what my colleagues on this panel talked about, touched upon in their talks. Shilpa talked about how many students are now deferring their plans to go abroad, and now they're looking to go abroad perhaps next year, or even looking towards their postgraduate education abroad, when originally they were looking at undergraduate. We saw how Mr. Iqbal, when he said that many students in Bangladesh, and this is true of perhaps the whole of South Asia, do not have access to the internet, or at least not enough access to provide a holistic learning environment. We've also seen how Rag has talked about innovative practices that perhaps US universities could take up to combat these problems that we are facing right now. It is true that students will not be going abroad to study, perhaps until 2021. So what should US universities do to tide this time? While I don't have any solutions, of course, I do have a few ideas. And I'd like to offer these strategies to US universities to consider pairing up and creating innovative articulation structures for student mobility. Because at the end of it all, at the core of what we do is the student. And we can't lose sight of the underlying aspiration of our students to pursue higher education in a country other than their birth. So we partnered with the University of Arizona, which is a long-standing strategic partner that JGU has, where we created a program where University of Arizona students who are from India will come and spend some time on JGU campus as and when it opens. Eventually, in 2021 or perhaps later, when the atmosphere and the environment is a little more conducive, they will shift over to the University of Arizona. So in effect, what we're doing is we're creating a University of Arizona campus within the JGU campus. Now the question is, what will these students do in the meantime? What we did not want is for our campus to become an online classroom experience only. So between the University of Arizona and ourselves, we put together a curriculum that closely matches the University of Arizona's undergraduate curriculum, which will then be delivered in a blended mode by JGU faculty members as well as University of Arizona faculty members. So in terms of this kind of a strategy where they are University of Arizona students, but they are on JGU campus being taught by JGU faculty members, mingling with JGU students to put together that holistic campus environment we've all come to love. And eventually, in 2021, they moved in the same undergraduate program to their host country, and by 2023, they graduate from the University of Arizona. It's important to realize that, as Rag said, this is a pause. It's not the end. And it's important for us to remember that this too shall pass. I'm going to end here, and I'm happy to take any questions that Ankur or others may have.
Thank you so much, Professor Rag, for that innovative idea. I think that is a very well received idea that we can see in admissions at OP Jindal Global University. There's a lot of interest in that program as well. So now, thank you so much. We have come to the end of our formal presentations, the slides that we have, but we have thought that since this is a recording and we will not have live audience, I will play the devil's advocate and ask our panelists the questions that probably you would have asked in a live situation. So I will quickly do that job and get some more clarifications from them on the ideas that they have shared with us. And let's begin in the order that we presented. If I can quickly move to Shilpa. Shilpa, I have a couple of questions for you. You mentioned about the situation that you're seeing with regards to COVID-19. I quickly want to understand what do you think are the biggest parent and student concerns, and do you have any advice for universities abroad to address those issues through special communication with regards to how they are dealing with COVID situation? How can they basically calm the anxiety of parents and students with regards to international education in coming times?
Sure. So thank you everybody for this lovely webinar. I think I enjoyed every minute of it. Coming back to conversations with parents and students, like I mentioned, I just feel that universities need to keep the communications going. We understand that our emails are flooded, but we appreciate those emails during these times because this is the only source of information or source of correct information that we have. The main concern that I'm hearing is obviously safety on campus in terms of health safety, whether the health measures are in place. Is there a doctor on call 24/7? What happens to the floor that has a COVID infected patient? Are there enough free spaces available to quarantine the students? So those are the kind of questions I am receiving from the parents. So that is the kind of communication we want ongoing. The second thing that parents are really concerned about is the tech support. Obviously, too much of online webinars, zooming out is exhausting the students. How best can we remodel education with stronger tech support? As Iqbal mentioned that internet is a challenge. So anything that requires lower bandwidth and is comfortable to opening in these zones are some things that universities really need to invest in, because that's, and having said that, this is not going to end. This is the future. So you will, even if you make that investment today, it is going to reap you benefits later. So it's not that it's getting over with the COVID pandemic. Your online education will go on. So it's important that we invest a little bit more on tech support and not rely completely on Zoom or WebEx or Google Meets. We need to really invest in tech support and health and safety. So those are two main concerns that I hear from parents and students.
Thank you, Shilpa. And subsequently, I think another related question will be: do you have any standout universities or education destination countries that you think are doing a good job at it, or already adapting to what you are saying?
I wouldn't have a particular university, because there are a lot of universities that are doing some good line of communication, and there are few that just don't communicate. I wouldn't say few universities, but yeah, few countries. There are countries that just don't communicate on what the plans are. We do hear a lot of communication from the United States, United Kingdom, but sadly not so much from the other countries. Even with Indian institutions, I was glad to see Delhi University do a webinar yesterday, which I'm hoping, and obviously all the liberal arts universities are in India are doing a fantastic job. But having said that, nothing other than these three countries I'm hearing, because there is a lot of anxiety. I know the Dutch universities have also started doing a lot of webinars, and I'm glad that Europe is also getting into the grind. But yes, I think case studies would be these four countries that they're doing their best in terms of communications.
Thank you, Shilpa. Thank you so much. Quickly moving on to Iqbal. Iqbal, I have a couple of questions for you now. I think one of the questions similar, since you are also counseling a lot of students and parents. What do you think, how are US universities responding to this crisis? And do you think things can be better managed, or what are your thoughts? And also related to parents and student anxieties, what is the situation on the ground? So if you can answer these couple of questions.
Thank you, Ankur. I'll go, I'll echo with Shilpa on the second question, because parents and Also, some of the students have similar concerns about their health and well-being. They want to make sure that wherever they go, they stay safe and they hassle-free, or they do not face any catastrophic situation. On the university communication side, we have been receiving information from a lot of US universities, I would say, every day, every week through different channels. A lot of universities, for example, I can definitely remember within last few days, University of Texas, Austin has announced or sent us a full list of what they are trying to do in next few months, like in terms of how many courses will be online or how they are moving forward. There are many universities like the University of California. They also announced or sent us updates. Those are just to give some examples, um, uh, not to point to any particular institutions, but we have been receiving information from US institutions about what they are trying to do. All the universities are trying to make sure that they ensure proper health and safety measures, and the students' well-being is well taken care of. So that's basically it.
Thank you, Iqbal. Now I would like to move on to Ra. I have a couple of questions for you. Since you are on the ground in US and you recruit students from all over the world, what do you think? We would like to know anything special that you guys are doing at Northern Arizona, any innovative strategies that you are applying or implementing to continue your recruitment of students from around the world. Any ideas that our colleagues can learn from?
Sure, absolutely. So, I think the big question, of course, as the world was caught off guard basically this last spring semester. After a while, of course, we were adapting to all these changes, but we also had to think about the future. And at that point of time, we knew that this would be a major challenge, which consulates and embassies shut, and students not being able to travel with limitations on air travel and so on. And that's where I think for us, a big part was adapting. So we looked at, what were some of the big cohorts of students, particularly at India. And I think we found that, computer science, engineering, those were some of those streams. So we brought the faculty together and we sort of, did, a few different webinars with these cohort of students in terms of that if we did have an option to go online for this semester, what would be some of the things that we could adapt that would certainly, do well for them also, since many of these students have never taken online courses. And I think, communicating with those students, we were able to sort of understand their needs from the technology side, still being able to have some level of interaction, but at a time which sort of suits, our Indian student population. So I think that was definitely an important part, but also communicating with the faculty and having graduate assistants for those particular programs at the master's level, where these students are from India and they come from again similar backgrounds, so they have an understanding of the technological challenges that our Indian students face. So I think sort of bringing the two sides together, but also keeping the cost down. I think when students go abroad to study, it's all about the experience. So if there are some students who might be looking at an online option, and I think cost is certainly a big factor to consider. If you're going to keep that same cost for your online course as what would be the case for an on-ground class, to be very frank, that wouldn't be fair to that student. And I think that's where, talking to our administrators, we were able to subsidize those costs by a huge margin, almost bringing it down to the 50% aspect, adding more scholarships to incentivize for many of these students. And so again, I think, a lot of these conversations was, again, communicating with these students and seeing what works for them and how can we adapt even in an online format and, sort of keep providing them with some options.
Thank you, Rag. Those are some really interesting steps that you have taken. I just want to take one more minute from you and try to understand how do you see the recruitment happening. I know you travel around the world for student recruitment, and most of us do that for attending fairs and school visits. How do you see that situation panning out? Are you participating in some virtual recruitment events? Anything that you feel you can recommend to us?
Absolutely. So, I think even when you think about recruitment in terms of on the ground, a lot of us, sometimes meet these students at high schools or perhaps at a recruiting fair. And to again be very frank, we don't end up spending a whole lot of time with these students at that point of time. We perhaps may meet them once, and then again, that follow-up conversation often follows through email, through WhatsApp in India, through phone calls, through webinars, sort of taking that conversation that we had with that student in their high school or in their college, and then sort of, taking that conversation ahead through those different communications. So in some ways, I would say, yes, we've been able to adapt quite well. Certainly there's a lot of phone calls. A lot of these students would like to communicate with you in person. Certainly not everyone is comfortable in asking questions in a big webinar. WhatsApp seems to be a pretty common thing for parents, students to connect. Having webinars for parents, talking about the situation, what's happening here. Again, when you're looking at undergraduate students, they're not the only decision makers when they think about going to study abroad. It's the parents also. And so you have to really bring them into this conversation also. And then inviting our students who are still here on campus and letting them communicate with those students, not just in webinars, but also on those personal conversations on WhatsApp and emails, just to kind of add the student perspective on how the situation is here on the ground, and what do the residence halls look like? Are people going out to get their groceries and things like that? So I think having that communication, the personalization of message is so vital to recruitment, even in this sort of virtual sort of format as we go through our Zooms and other medium platforms.
Thank you so much, Rag. Now, quickly moving on to Professor Arjo. Professor Arjo, I know for a fact, a lot of universities have interest in doing MOUs and partnerships with Indian universities, but a lot of my colleagues from abroad tell me that it's very tough to get into India. There's a lot of red tape. There are a lot of regulations that they need to, that they're simply not able to comprehend. It's a complex world. Everybody says India is a complex country. So what is your advice for universities who would like to collaborate? And is there any quick steps that they can follow? Any list that they can follow on this, how to go about this partnership that you had?
Sure. Thanks so much, Ankur, for this question. I agree with you completely. I mean, we've been in the education space for so many years, and I agree that regulation of higher education in India is a bureaucratic nightmare, and it used to be very, very difficult to partner with foreign universities or even to hire foreign faculty members. However, in recent years, the government has been more progressive and has been more open to sort of allowing quality Indian universities to open up their campuses and to open up their borders, so to speak. And it's come on the back of a number of regulatory reforms, the most recent of which is the Institutions of Eminence scheme. So what the government has done is that it has selected 10 public universities, 8 private universities, and 2 greenfield universities, which are free from all regulatory control. What this means is that these universities, these 20 universities, need not seek UGC or any governmental approval for setting up of new colleges or programs or schemes, or even sort of measures that we are doing with the University of Arizona. Of course, we are fortunate in that we are one of those institutes of eminence. So if a US university would like to sort of partner with an Indian university along the same lines as the program that we have with the University of Arizona, I'd say look for an institute of eminence. And by the way, the University of Arizona hasn't partnered with us exclusively. So for non-STEM subjects, and we are known for our social sciences, arts, and humanities, they've partnered with us, but they've partnered for their STEM subjects, their engineering programs, with Amrita University, which is also a very high quality institute of eminence. So it might help for US universities to take a look at what are the institutes of eminence in India, and and for a fact they will be able to, should be able to set up sort of these articulation programs easier than other universities in India.
Thank you so much, Professor Arjo. That is a wonderful tip for our colleagues. Definitely, Institute of Eminence is something that universities from abroad should be interested in, since they are free from the bureaucratic red tape that is here in India. So I think I have come to the end of my questionnaire, and we have come to the end of our session. I would like to, on behalf of the group, I would like to say a sincere gratitude to all of you who are listening to this post this recording. My sincere gratitude to International ACAC and the team for organizing this virtual conference. It takes a lot of effort. So I think I speak on behalf of the group and I say thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to collaborate with our colleagues from around the world. Even though if we can't be there in person, this is the next best thing for us. So that is from us. Team, if you would like to say any last words of advice, you are free to do it now. Any parting messages for anyone?
Yeah, so I just want to say that we do have a dedicated forum post for any questions that you may have. So feel free, once you've seen our webinar and you wish to ask us any questions, one of us would be happy to answer your questions. So keep your questions flowing, and yeah, keep in touch. You've got your email addresses. Feel free to email us. Feel free to ask questions on the forum, and have a good day and enjoy the conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a good conference.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.